Hi everyone, this is Arvind Venkataraman, Chief Correspondent from NastyPolitics.com, home of sugar-free news. Today we've got an interview with James Damore, the ex-Googler who became the recent subject of controversy on his stance on gender equality and diversity in the tech industry. I interviewed James to hear his side of the story on what the facts are, what companies can do to address diversity, and a few other surprises. Well, glad that we could chat today, and thanks again for taking the call. And just wanted to kind of discuss with you. I've got some questions from my end, and then also some questions from some of our viewers that wanted to touch base with you, just to kind of get the story across. Because I just read the full memo a few days ago, and it seemed to be have some differences between kind of what you wrote and kind of what the media had portrayed. And
Yeah,
thought I'd kind of get the full story. But I guess how are things in the Bay Area and with you in general?
they're okay.
That's good. That's good. And really, the first question I wanted to ask was, so what prompted you to write the memo? Because it seemed like it was something that you had observed that was going on. And then I guess first question is, what prompted you to write it, and what do you think went wrong with how it was disseminated?
Yeah, so I've been at Google for 4 years, and so I saw a lot of problems in our culture, and then I've been going to a lot of these diversity programs over the last few months, and they specifically asked for feedback. And so I wanted to really clarify my thoughts on some of these things. So I wrote this document, and I sent it to them, and they just ignored it. They looked at it, but they ignored it. And then I went to some more programs. I sent it to them. They again looked at it, but just ignored it.
And so what
And
was the time span from when you wrote it to when it kind of started blowing up?
I wrote it at the end of June, beginning of July. And then I, after discussing it with some more colleagues, I sent it to some email list on August 2nd, just to see, like, please point the holes in my argument. Like, because if I'm right, then there are some bad things happening, right? Or, and then it exploded from that email list, actually.
From there. And so was it somebody from Google that kind of leaked it out to social media, or was it like how did that happen? Because it seemed like there were just certain screenshots that initially came out, and then it kind of became the cold crap storm from there.
Yeah, so there were these people on Twitter that were complaining about it. So I think that's how it initially got leaked. So people saw that people on Twitter were complaining, and then Gizmodo contacted those people, got their thoughts on things, got a screenshot of the document, and then later Gizmodo got the whole document. So it was likely through those people that it got leaked. No one related to me ever leaked it because they would have asked.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's in the whole crux of the argument comes down to whether there is a discrepancy in tech with gender, ethnicity, and then how meritocratic is it? And so, from your experience, uh, how accurate is that assessment of this perceived inequality with gender and ethnicity? Are there people that are being discriminated, or is it just kind of the is that the distribution of people that are in this space?
Yeah, I mean, at least in my experience, and this is true for a lot of the things that I've pursued in life. Like, I mean, I used to play chess a lot, used to play Magic the Gathering.
Oh yeah, me too. I was a big
Yeah.
Magic fan.
Yeah, like, I mean, everyone wants the girl to play. There's huge encouragement for girls to play these things. And same thing for computer science now. There's huge amount of encouragement. And there's just less interest. They don't find it as compelling as a lot of the men do. While, I've always, like, I would spend hours and hours on the computer just looking up magic sets and constructing the perfect deck, and also just reading through chess books for like 8 hours a day. And I was obsessed with these things. They're just, some women just don't find that a good use of their time.
But are there, on the flip side, I guess, are there women that do show, I guess, that tenacity and and do find their ways in these kinds of software engineering positions, or just kind of in leadership positions in tech?
Yeah, so I mean, what I was saying was mostly just like averages, but
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a distribution. So there are some women that do have these proclivities. It's just that there are fewer of them.
Just on average. And I guess another corollary to that I was wondering is, you always see, in the TV show of Silicon Valley, or even just all those articles that people write about, like the Silicon Valley elevator, that just about kind of the programmers per se, or like just kind of how people have these attitudes in the industry. And is that an accurate characterization, or again, is that just, on average, how does that work? Like, are people in Silicon Valley toxic towards people of these minorities, or is that kind of a mischaracterization?
Yeah, I think it's largely a mischaracterization. Obviously, once you get a ton of guys together that are nerdy, they're going to talk about nerdy stuff. But there's, like, at least I saw in Silicon Valley a little bit, like these Nerf gun fights and like fraternity house type things, which isn't really that prevalent. And it's mostly just nerdy things that happen. And then again, like of course these people are socially not very cognizant of like how to necessarily interact with people. And the women generally are better at socializing, so they can see that difference, and they can feel isolated because of that. And many of these awkward guys don't necessarily even know how to interact with girls. So I mean, that's some of the what some of the women in Silicon Valley are feeling, but I think that's far from what the media has been portraying it as. This total bro culture where women are totally disrespected, and I haven't really seen that at all.
From that type of deal, yeah. And then in your memo, you kind of compared the ocean personality indicators, like openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, for men and women. And you had that one chart where you kind of showed it was like the two overlapping bell curves of traits, and then how there was significant overlap. And then you had that other chart where it showed kind of those two vertical lines where it's just kind of there's no overlap. And why is it better to look at, I guess, traits and populations on a spectrum versus kind of just the black and white? And I guess, do you think that that type of thinking is prevalent in HR and in recruiting? Like, are people looking at these indicators on a spectrum, or do we tend to boil it down to black and white?
Yeah, so there are many things that cause us to just look at it, or many programs at Google that essentially just reduce it to that, the vertical lines. So there's some programs at Google that basically make the same assertions that I do, that women are more cooperative and maybe they feel more anxiety or more prone to anxiety. And therefore they have some programs that are only for women and they specifically address those two aspects. While, there are many men that have those same traits and they don't get any support at all. And so they're the ones that are stereotyping. And I'm really just saying, okay, there is this distribution. There are some things that we may expect from this distribution, but we should still be treating people as individuals. And maybe there are some men that have these traits too, so we should support them.
Right, instead of, I guess, just lumping people within each other. So these programs, again, that you mentioned a couple times, could you or just anybody else that's a Googler go to these trainings or these kind of additional programs, or are they limited to where if you're not in that category, you don't have access to those?
Yeah, if you're not in the category, you can't really get in. It says for women.
It's like for women, but wouldn't it benefit to have, I guess, open discussions about those types of topics versus just kind of it's almost like a reservation type system, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of aspects at Google where they think that open discussion is actually harmful. I mean, that's why they were trying to silence my document, right? They thought that this was actually harmful to people. That, seeing, scientific studies is harmful to people.
And so what is the goal, I guess, of Google or of like having equitable, are we trying to reach 50% male, 50% female, or to have 10% of each, or 10 different types of ethnicities, or like, or what is the ideal of diversity?
Yeah, so I think they want exact representation from the population.
Of just kind of how it's distributed normally, because it kind of reminds me of, so my family's from India, and one of the reasons why they left India was, and ostensibly why the CEO Sundar Pichai also left, was they have a very strict caste-based quota where there's certain percentages that are limited, and so if you're not, if they already took in 10% of this one group, then sorry, you're not going to be able to get into the college that you wanted. And while that could be considered equal, that also seems like it's even more discriminatory, because it's limiting those kinds of opportunities. And it seems like, is that kind of like what you saw at Google? I mean, obviously not as strictly, but in principle, did that seem similar to what they were trying to reach?
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar thought process, where they thought that anything that wasn't representative of the population was bad. Even though, obviously Googlers aren't really representative of the population. We're all dirty people that are presumably smarter than normal and stuff.
Which is true. But and one question that one of our viewers had was, you consider yourself to be a classical liberal, is that right? And kind of, I guess, leaning on some issues towards that stance. And how prevalent is your viewpoint or a similar viewpoint at Google, and how openly are they able to express it, or are they also kind of, is that type of thinking suppressed?
Yeah, it's hard to say exact percentages. I think there's a lot of left-leaning people at Google, but then also, and there aren't many conservatives at all, I don't think, but there are a decent number of libertarians or classical liberals. Like, I mean, I'm lumping all those together, right?
Yeah.
And so they, because that type is actually just like very logical, and I don't know if you know the like Myers-Briggs types.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I'm familiar with the kind of like the ENTJs. Oh, that's what mine is.
Yeah, like so libertarians are NT. Like, they have the highest prevalence of NT, which is what is most prevalent in tech. So I think they are overrepresented in tech relative to the population.
It's very interesting. And did you ever find other cases where the political aspect of Google kind of came through, like whether it was in a project or with an interaction with a team?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that kept coming up for me, so I worked on images and videos in search, and one aspect that we're just like completely blind to is porn. So, and that is a huge percent of our queries, actually. Like 20% of image search queries are porn seeking, and even more for videos. And it's something that we just completely take out of our analysis. So we don't do anything that is like, we don't optimize for the users that are searching for that at all. And because, we see pornography as like some sexist thing, and like, obviously there are some like moral questions about it, but to just completely ignore it is likely not the best thing when it's 20% of your queries, and there's like billions of those a day.
It's a huge, and could that, I guess, benefit the efficiency of image search? Because I'm sure that whatever queries they're searching have attributes to the pictures that people might be like looking for that you might want to categorize.
Yeah.
Like, that's really interesting. And I guess going back to the whole I guess liberalism thing, like one goal of libertarians is always like smaller government, let corporations, companies take a stance. But then at what point do companies start resembling governments?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question that I don't have a very good answer for. But I mean, it is something that people are starting to look at for Google, where it has become such a monopoly in our information seeking lives. And so some of the practices that it's doing are pretty scary. Like if it's going to start censoring results that it doesn't find politically accurate or politically like it doesn't agree with, then that's going to have huge societal effects.
Mm-hmm. And so do you think we should be more careful about how we use Google products because of this politicization, or like how would you recommend, just like as a user, like am I able to find whatever I want to openly from the product, or is that type of thinking something that's mainly within the I guess internally versus what's customer facing?
So there have been cases in YouTube, for example, where for right-wing commentators, they'll demonetize them and sometimes deplatform them, which also takes them away from the trending home screen and stuff. And they do this even for pretty centrist people now, just people that talk about controversial topics. They start getting this demonetization. And so, yeah, if you know the exact link to go to, then you can still find it, but you won't be finding it as easily through their recommendations.
So they're basically delisting, I guess, anything that could be potentially considered to be controversial.
Yeah, although it's only controversial on one end of the spectrum. So they are generally fine with anything that's extremely left-leaning, but they'll censor things that criticize the left in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I found really interesting in your memo was that you talked about, I guess, just like how, just with science and I guess natural sciences and social sciences, how they're not political in themselves, but they kind of tend to be. Could you explain that a little more of kind of how you see that working? Because that was something I thought was really interesting and wanted to just learn a little more about.
Yeah, so we all have these biases, and because of your political biases that you're largely blind to, you may, and there's a lot of motivated reasoning that goes behind what your scientific beliefs are. So people on the left will deny any difference between people, and anything that attacks a victim in some ways or blames a victim. And so, the whole concept of IQ is often just denied by the left. And also, as we've seen, any innate sex differences is also denied. And, any aspect of evolution as it applies to people is often ignored. And the whole field of stereotypes and stereotype accuracy is also something that is ignored. But like the right also has its areas where it denies things like, evolution and climate science or climate change. And and also even like war crimes. Mm-hmm. So the right is more likely to deny war crimes. And so, we should be really cognizant of these biases because, especially since 95% of the social sciences now lean left, they're starting to deny biology in many ways and deny, stereotype accuracy and just look for only social reasons for why certain groups are currently, there are disparities between groups, So, all of this must be because of sexism. And they only look for sexism against women, actually, which is another one of their biases, because they've identified women as victims, so they can't blame them at all. And there's this whole idea of agency as it applies to gender. So men are the active agents and women are the ones that get acted towards. And so you know, when a man fails, it's his personal fault. But when a woman fails, it's some external fault. And so that goes into a lot of why we're denying some of these aspects.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I guess, having the categories of victim and not victim, then you then begin to assign morality.
Yeah.
Kind of from there. That's an interesting thought. And so I guess so what is next for you? And I guess, are you attempting to take any action towards Google, or I guess, are you allowed to tell me that?
Yeah, I'm still figuring out things for myself. I mean, I'm obviously interested in ideas and stuff, so I like that my voice is now being heard, at least. But I'd like to expand that beyond this one subject, because I mean, this was just one document that I wrote that it wasn't like my life's passion, biological sex differences or something. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I will be trying to somehow change Google for the better. And especially some of this political discrimination that we've seen, where there are actual blacklists of people that say, I won't hire you, I won't work with you, I'll even sabotage your work because of your political views.
Interesting. And I guess, and you're an academic as well. Like, I know you're a grad student at Harvard. And so, what are some other, I guess, areas within academia that you focus on? Obviously outside of gender discrimination, and I guess, is psychology something that you research? Because I know we talked in lengths about psychology, but I was just curious, kind of what, from an academic standpoint, that you're looking at.
Yeah, I guess historically I was doing a lot of game theory type stuff, and then evolution as applied to that, and mathematical biology. And yeah, psychology is also another field that I really like. I've dabbled in economics, but not too deeply. And like the general sciences I like, but I mean, it's hard to make any meaningful progress in those.
Yeah, it's kind of with the processes and I guess bureaucracy of it. And so, is there anything that you want kind of the world or the internet to know about kind of you, or kind of your situation, or is there anything that you want to convey to our viewers, but also just to people in general?
I guess, and one instructive thing I've noticed, at least, is how much this illustrates people's biases. You can look at two different newspapers or sites and see a completely different story on this. And it's especially for an event that, the full text of the document is actually online. So, you can see that they are actually interpreting the exact same thing differently. And, sometimes it's unclear how much they're just pandering to their audience, and this is what their audience wants to see, or if they actually believe what they're writing. And they've actually read the entire thing and they actually believe this. And I think some do actually believe what they're writing and believe that, no, the science doesn't show this at all, and I'm just making stuff up. And I'm just cherry picking single studies, when really there have been hundreds of studies that have shown this. So I don't know.
Gotcha. It's like writing for clicks versus writing for truth.
Yeah. Yeah, the incentives aren't really there.
Well, cool. Do you have any questions for me or anything? I think those were all the points that I talked about that I wanted to kind of cover
I guess, what would you say has been, like, what have you noticed from the whole event?
The whole event. So I initially kind of saw it from whatever Gizmodo initially posted, and then I'm pretty active on Twitter, so I saw kind of all the tweets going through, and then a lot of my friends on Facebook tend to lean left or I guess I have friends from both sides, but at first I didn't really know what to think. I was like, okay, what's going on? Is it just another programmer kind of doing his thing? And so, but then the more I read into it, it's like, yeah, maybe there are. Is this just a one-sided issue, or is there more going on that it has not been conveyed? And the more that I started reading into it, it became more evident that I guess whatever Gizmodo was conveying, whatever the major media was conveying, was not really the whole story. And so that was when we just started this news site a few weeks ago, actually, and wanted to try to see what is the actual story here, what's going on. And I don't know if there is kind of a clear-cut answer like you were saying. Like, I think there's definitely different perspectives on what people think diversity and equality is, and I guess what is the difference between equality and fairness, and so that was kind of what I learned, and I learned a lot from our conversation here as well, and it also just reminded me a lot of kind of, like I said, what my parents were complaining about before they left India, because people seek opportunity from a meritocratic standpoint, but it seems like that's not always the case within organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think at the base, most people would agree that equal opportunity is what we should shoot for, but then they disagree whether or not we truly do have equal opportunity. So they see disparity in outcome, and then conservatives are more likely to believe that disparity in outcome is natural and just, while progressives see most disparities and see some injustice being done. And so it's hard for them to look at this gender gap and believe that there isn't some sort of sexism happening.
Yeah, and I'd say there's definitely, I don't know on average where it would lean, but I think there's enough cases from both where there is natural kind of predispositions, but there's also, like, I'm not going to deny, there's definitely cases where there is repression of certain groups, and not just in tech, but just in kind of corporate America or in employment in general. But then I don't think that people often look at that. They just kind of boil it down going back to I guess those vertical lines of versus looking at it on a distribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess going back to Magic the Gathering, what type of decks did you used to play? So my main deck was a black and blue counterspell deck.
Oh yeah, I like those. Yeah, I moved around a lot. I had the goblins deck, which I liked
Goblins were
because,
fun.
like, yeah, you could play aggro, but also there were some combo elements to it, and even against a more aggressive deck, you would be sort of controlling. So it was like not just a super mindless aggro deck. That I like that aspect of it.
So those were good. Did you ever play Allies, or was that past your time of Magic the Gathering?
Allies.
That was like, it came out like that was when I was in high school, so it was like 2011 or 12.
That was Zendikar, right?
Yeah, from Zendikar.
I think I wasn't playing then. I've started in like Urza Saga and then have been on and off since then.
Oh, gotcha. That was when I got in from Zendikar, but then I bought a ton of Ravnica cards because my neighbor just gave me this big box, and so I went back and made those like really old cards, but they were just really fun making like. I always enjoyed like deck building as well, just the strategic aspect of like finding cards that go together, and then you play test it, you figure out it sucks, and then like make the tweaks, go back and swap the cards out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely spent a lot of my life on Magic.
That's awesome. It's always good to see a fellow MTG fan. And so I guess, and then I guess the last question I've got for you is, outside of software engineering, what are you mentioned you're a chess player and MTG. Like, what are your other hobbies though? Do you spend most of your day kind of cranking out projects, or do you game? Do you like? I see you've got your bike.
Oh yeah, and if you see in there's a ton of board games.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, what's something about James that I guess we can't learn from the internet, and that you want people to know? I'm sure you're a genuine and nice guy, and not just the programmer that Gizmodo plays you out to be sometimes.
Yeah, I have like a very strong ethic of not wanting to waste my time, and so that influences a lot of the things that I do. So I try to read books a ton, and I always feel guilty if I play video games. But somehow, Magic feels like it's intellectually stimulating enough that it's not a waste of time.
Gotcha. And what books are you reading right now?
I guess someone just gave me this book, which it's about like autism and how autism is sort of just an extreme form of a very systematic brain. So manipulating systems, which, Magic is essentially just a large system and a lot of logic within that versus empathy and, understanding people's emotions and intentions. So that is interesting to me, to be able to understand systems in general and like have this framework, sort of like the Myers-Briggs thing where, you have this framework to try to understand human psychology. I like those types of things.
Yeah, that's really interesting to kind of think of, because I guess that's ultimately what computing and I guess what software is trying to do is emulate or measure human interactions, and so finding ways to take something, put a circle into a square peg, or how do we determine what pegs that we want to measure? I think that's really fascinating. I'll definitely have to check out that book or an ebook of it.
Mm. Yeah, The Essential Difference. That's what it's called.
Cool. Yeah, I'll jot that down. And awesome. Well, I won't take up any more of your time this morning. I know that you're a busy guy, but thanks again for taking the time to speak with me. Well, there you have it. This is Arvind Venkataraman, Chief Correspondent here at Nasty Politics. Thanks for watching the interview, and don't forget to like Nasty Politics on Facebook and follow nastypolitics.com for more breaking stories, interviews, and content.